Obviously, it's no secret that a good majority of people are not happy with the Ancient Gods Part 2 DLC. What was supposed to be this epic climactic end to the Doomslayer saga, the end of the Samuel Hayden Vega story arc, and even the 1-year anniversary of Doom Eternal all got dwarfed by something I don't think any of us saw coming. A complete 180 of the Doom Eternal community just flipping around on id Software and even turning on itself. I've noticed over these past couple days, people fighting with each other in my own comment section and other people's comment section. Casuals and elitists are ripping each other apart. Some people are talking shit to the developers, and it's sad to see, especially from a community that seemed so wholesome just a couple weeks prior. Hey, at least none of us resorted to death threats, am I right? Anyways, today I want to talk a little bit more about this. This video is basically replacing my Ancient Gods Part 2 review. I think everything I have to complain about, everyone else complained about already. So instead, what I wanted to do was tackle the idea of why the Ancient Gods Part 2 is so disappointing to seasoned players, and even, defend itself for a little bit here, because remember, the Ancient Gods Part 2 and even the Part 1 DLC are both standalone packages, so I'm going to try and present both sides of the argument here for everyone to see, try to meet a middle ground here, and during the course of this video I ask that you please respect one another in the comment section and hear me out and hear everyone else out as well. And if you for whatever reason can't refrain from arguing or talking shit, then I invite you to do what I do. Take out your anger in Alston's comment section. He'll enjoy the engagement, trust me. He might be a little confused by a lot of the comments being so horribly out of context, but that adds to the fun. So let's start this off with the biggest gripe everyone has with DLC 2, with it being too easy and disappointing. Now, before this DLC released, I actually took a 2-month break from Doom Eternal. No one noticed because, like a real shitty content creator, I had so much surplus footage, I can make a documentary on how the evolution of my gameplay has gotten worse, and that's basically because all my good gameplay I used first. But anyways, I took a break because I was tired of the game, there was nothing new since the Super Gorness Master level, and I wanted to cleanse my palate. I was planning on finishing the base campaign for the millionth time before the DLC dropped, and the reason for that was because that was in anticipation of Eternal's 1-year anniversary. I had a huge video planned up, and I was trying to recapture that feeling of my very first playthrough from a year ago. Obviously, with the pain of muscle memory, 2 months isn't enough to relive that very first time, but it was close enough. And during this run, I remember thinking one of my biggest post-launch criticisms: these first levels, especially Hell on Earth, should be harder. And with that thought in mind, I was sure to take note of everything Doom Eternal's base campaign throws at you in the first 3 levels, which on paper is quite a bit, and I'm going to take you through that. Hell on Earth introduces you to how the chainsaw works in this game, since it's fundamental for the combat loop, weapon mods, glory kills, the weak point system, and with it, 2 heavy demons, the Arachnotron and the Caco Demon, for you to really get that weak point system down. We get our very first taste of platforming, a second weapon, and its weapon mod, grenades, and how grenades can replace sticky bombs for a Caco Demon's falter. During this time, I highly doubt first-time players are going to know that grenades are guaranteed staggers on all demons. We also can't forget that a lot of people complain that the chainsaw is necessary, but we'll get into that stuff in a moment. Let's move on to Exultia. This level introduces a flame belch and how it gives you armor, sentinel crystals, and their subsequent abilities from acquiring 2 on the same bracket, dash, weapon points for upgrading your guns, secret encounters, more advanced platforming, blood punch, slayer gates, runes, 2 more heavy demons, which are the Hell Knight and the Revenant, plus the Dread Knight if you decide to jump into the slayer gate, which is an optional fight for you to really learn how to double down on the fundamentals of this game. Cultist Base, which for a lot of players is still considered the hardest level in the entire game, brings ice bombs, the Ripatorium, Praetor suit points, more sentinel crystals, and 2 more weapons, the super shotgun and the rocket launcher. We're also introduced to mission challenges, sentinel batteries, traps, whiplashes, the Mancubus, and again, if you decide to play the Slayer Gate, Prowlers. Do you know how much information that is to throw at a player in about 3 hours of gameplay? And that's just the fundamentals. I haven't talked about the advanced stuff. I said grenades are guaranteed falters. People aren't going to know that their first time around. They're also not going to really realize that you're invincible during glory kills and chainsaw kills until about midway through the game. If they're paying attention, using the meat hook, they're probably only going to use it for that chance to bring themselves to that very quick demon to, hit him with a super shotgun really quick. They're not going to use it for any type of traversal. They're not going to use it for aerial combat. They're not going to know that latching onto a demon, then jumping to detach is going to give you a nice aerial advantage. They're not going to know what runes work for them, what weapon mods work for them, how to play, ultimately how to move, or how to fit all of their weapons into the combat loop. Chances are they're probably only going to stick to 2 guns or maybe even 1, trying to play it like it's Doom 2016 still. And even if you did know how to move, you're still kind of fucked because your movement and even your weapon arsenal is neutered. And that's why, even for the more experienced players, this level's fucking challenging. There's a steep learning curve that by cultist base you have to double down on. This is also the point where it's really pushed home that you need to learn how to multitask. You get a little bit of that in Exultia, but cultist base, it's right there, front and center. If you can't multitask, if you can't know how to move, if you can't cycle through your weapons or use anything more than just 2 guns, you're not gonna win on anything harder. This is told to you in the 3rd level, and I brought up cultist base specifically because I think this is a prime example for both sides of the argument. For newcomers, the DLC doesn't have the luxury of teaching everyone the fundamentals, and I think id Software went a little bit lighter to accommodate those that decide to start on this DLC for whatever reason. On the flip side of that coin, DLC should not be like this, especially when you start up the DLC and you're greeted with this nice little description that says, but with more demons because it's DLC. And then you hop in a world spear and you notice all this empty real estate. The fuck? I swear being catfished on Tinder was never this disappointing, and that's sad to say for everyone involved. But if being a little bit more welcoming was such a bother, I've talked about changing demon combinations, changing how demons act on lower difficulty settings, ultra violence and higher, giving the real experience. I don't think it would be too much to say that if this was the player's first time playing anything Doom related or anything Doom Eternal related, then a pop-up menu would be given to them, and it's a completely different experience where all the heavy demons and all the mechanics are spoon-fed to them. I mean, spoon-fed sounds really bad. I don't mean it like that. What I mean is they're eased into it, because Doom Eternal does have a lot of shit that you do need to juggle. And World Spirit certainly doesn't make things any easier with Miuk platforming, 3 new demons, and the Sentinel Hammer. That's more stuff that you gotta incorporate into your combat loop, plus support runes. I mean, there's only 3, but that's still something that players are gonna want to learn to experiment with. And that's in defense of id Software. That's a lot of stuff to put on the shoulders of players, experiment, mess around with, and see what fits their play style. I mean, I guess they could have gave them access to the repertorium. They could have made Slayer gates on the side that were pretty much nothing more than glorified tutorials that gradually brought them up to somewhat equal level with the rest of the player base that has been playing the game since launch. At least knowing the fundamentals should have been required. But no, instead, we're just going to tweak the entire DLC. But going back to what we're taught in cultist base, where's the sink or swim moment for players that have been familiar with this combat system for the last year? Now, I'm not going to talk on the Ancient Gods Part 1 nerf. I've already touched on that. But what I do want to point out is that with the Ancient Gods Part 1, when that first dropped, the very first level, id Software doubles down on the "we're fine upsetting you, but we always have something to teach you." No, I wasn't going to put in the stupid ass get good meme. Fuck off. And here in the Ancient Gods Part 2, there's nothing like that. Environmentally alone, I would argue that the Ancient Gods Part 1 is so much harder, because you're in these tight corridors, you're in all of these tight spaces where you have to deal with heavy demons in numbers and in combinations that were never thrown at you before. This is of course all original gameplay. This is not the changed DLC, but this was the epitome of, hey, we're not messing around. What did you learn with the last 20 hours of the base campaign? That introduction was such a pain in the ass. That level took me 3 hours to beat on ultra violence, mainly because I had a lot of bad habits. It forced me to break them. I had no choice but to learn and adapt. This is starting to sound like an AA meeting. I needed help, you know, and I'm all the more grateful for it. It's made me a better player. I aced that level like no problem. I hated that level, and now it's my favorite level of the entire, well, it was until they changed it, but there's nothing like that in the Ancient Gods Part 2. Like, just compare the introductions. In the Ancient Gods Part 1, originally you had a Mancubus, 2 Revenants, and then 2 Hell Knights, followed up with a Carcass, a Dread Knight, and a Mancubus, then another Carcass, and a Hell Knight. Follow that up with an Arachnotron, 2 Cyber Mancubi, 3 Caco Demons, 2 more Arachnotrons, and then a Baron of Hell. Keep in mind, you're on an oil rig. You don't have any open space. I mean, if you're ballsy and you know how to dash and you know how to meat hook, then, you know, you can kind of go on the outsides and float around. If you fuck up, you're obviously gonna, you know, fall off the edge, but you're pressured. You're forced to either quick swap or know how to move, or do both. In the Ancient Gods Part 2, what do you have? A bunch of Fodder Demon, 2 Shield Soldiers, Cyber Mancubi. You're introduced to meat hook platforming, and then you get this giant open arena. You know, it's very wide. This is your introduction to the Screecher, which is cool, I guess, but this fight is pretty much 2 Carcasses dead center, a Caco Demon to your far right, and then a Hell Knight. And here's the thing, it looks like that second Caco Demon doesn't spawn in until after you kill the first one and that Hell Knight, and it spawns on the other side of the arena anyway, so there's no pressure. There's no pressure from any demons, because the arena is just large enough for you to really not worry about anything, and there's no environmental hazards. There's nothing forcing you to adapt or move or panic. This fight is quick. 2 Carcasses, 2 Hell Knights, 2 Caco Demons, then clear up the fodder, and that's it. The next arena, same exact thing. Giant open space, that ends incredibly fast. And it's easy to clear out because there's launch pads, there's different elevations that you can utilize to your advantage to isolate heavier demons from the fodder. You can have the fodder head up the stairs to the right, funnel them that way, hit them with the flame belch followed by a grenade, make them follow you downstairs and do the exact same thing. Or you can utilize the mired platforming point that they put in the center of the arena to really rain down hell, which is unfortunate because they only have 3 points like this in the entire DLC, and all 3 of those points are contained to just World Spear. My biggest fear was that mired platforming was going to be a gimmick, and it is. 3 points in the entire DLC that it's incorporated into the combat. All 3 points are kept to the first level. All of them are very short fights, and you would expect this stuff to make a comeback in at least Imora, the 3rd level, or even the final boss fight. But no, it stays in this level. Hell, mired platforming doesn't even make its way into Imora. It comes back in Reclaimed Earth, which is a 2nd level, and all it's used for is traversal. Fun, right? Look, I know Hugo's came out and he's said that you can't make DLC incredibly hard, and that's what master levels are for, but considering we've only had 1 master level in the course of a year, and the Ancient Gods Part 2 DLC is way easier than Ancient Gods Part 1, there's still not a good explanation for why this DLC is the way it is. I keep getting asked if I'm going to put out any Ultra Nightmare guides. If you guys need it, I'll put out one. I can guarantee I'll carry every single one of you through this entire DLC on Ultra Nightmare with just 1 guide. And that's not even being full of myself. I can teach you all the basics and all the things you need to know for all 3 levels. Just the general tips. You can just abuse the hammer, which, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I like the hammer. I think it should stay the way it is. But to compensate for that, we need to be dealing with 2 or 3 times more demons than what we're dealing with now. Escalation encounters are also all disappointing. I think the 2nd encounter on Imora is how all the fights should be. And speaking of how things should be, I'm not a fan of any of the new demons. I don't like how all of them are basically reskins, and I personally don't like the Cursed Prowler. I think that demon feels incredibly cheap. Did you guys know that a Cursed Prowler can curse you across the map via its projectile, and you basically are guaranteed to die until it comes right next to you? This demon is a complete inversion of what this whole DLC feels like. This DLC seems like a weird mashup for everyone, and that this demon was placed here for the higher tier players, but it's screws over all players because your movement is stripped of you. If id Software is dedicated on keeping this demon in the DLC, what they should do is once you're cursed by it, it at least stays within a close proximity of you. It should also have its own sound effects different from the regular Prowler because you can't tell a damn difference. That demon feels cheap. And back to World Spear, the part where you're locked in the purple goop around the fountain with 2 mancubi, that seems incredibly cheap too. It was like they were trying to recapture that moment from UAC Facility where you got locked in a tunnel with 2 carcasses and a tyrant, but they couldn't come up with anything else, so they just decided to lock you in a bubble with 2 mancubi and purple goo so that way you can't move. It just seems like a lot of these fights weren't really thought out that well. Anyways, to wrap this up, for experienced players, the DLC does not add anything to the Doom dance. It doesn't add anything to the combat loop. It does develop bad habits because, yeah, I'm addicted to using the hammer. I love it, I really do, but that doesn't mean I'm ignorant to the bad habits I'm already developing with it. As I said before, this is DLC. So for casual players, I hear you, I genuinely do. But this is supposed to be the end to a game that even the game director said is a skill-based shooter. You can't get mad about me saying it needs to be more challenging on Nightmare and harder. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Just because I'm saying that ultra violence and higher should respect the player and give them that challenge that they're looking for does not mean anyone is an elitist. That means that the game is delivering on what it promised, and it's delivering on something that the base game promised. As of right now, the difficulty goes as follows, in my opinion. From easy to hard, you have the Ancient Gods Part 2, the Ancient Gods Part 1, which is 2 notches above the Ancient Gods Part 2, and then the base campaign. I only say the base campaign because you're screwed on your movement and your weapon arsenal, and you gotta learn how to swim with one arm, so to speak. I've heard some complaints about the environments in the DLC, to be honest with you. I do enjoy all the environments. I love Imora to death, especially with all the crazy shit going on in the background, but none of the fights are really all that memorable. I keep saying World Spear so much because it's the only map that incorporates anything new. The arenas are giant, you have a few moments with the mired platforming to incorporate to the combat, and that's essentially it. Everything else is ultimately forgettable. There's no moments like Ancient Gods Part 1 where you remember the buffed Marauder, or you remember fighting possessed barons, or you remember, again, being locked in a room with a tyrant. The DLC is good in its own right. If it was Part 1, I don't think anyone would be disappointed. But ending off a year worth of dedication and I'm aware of the pandemic and how they've been working from home, it's just a very soft ending. And I think they ended up hitting that mark where they tried to please everyone, but in the end, they pleased no one. Anyways, let's talk more about the DLC. How do you guys feel about all this? I'm split. I expected these DLCs to be more for the dedicated hardcore player base. Obviously, the Ancient Gods Part 1 turned so many people off so quickly, but those that stuck to it loved it to death, and this DLC didn't get that chance. Straight out from the gate, everyone already made up their mind about it. Obviously, things can change. They changed the whole Slayer Gate via an update, so as of right now, I have high hopes, but who really knows, honestly? Well, let's talk down in the comment section. Do you agree with my position on the main campaign and how it basically kicked your ass? And here DLC 2 is giving you everything on a silver platter. If you guys are interested in a nice Q&A I did on first-person shooters, you guys can check out a nice little blog that I'll link down below in the description and in the pinned comment. Me and Nick touch on games like Call of Duty, Doom Eternal, Doom 2016, and Ultrakill. But until next time, guys, I'll see y'all later.